First Chronicles chapter 15, verses 25 through 29. Today we'll be talking about worship. So David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of the thousands went to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with rejoicing. And because God helped the Levites who were carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord, they sacrificed 7 bulls and 7 rams. David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, as also were all the Levites who were carrying the ark, and the singers and the Chenanian and the leader of the music of the singers. And David wore a linen ephod. So all Israel brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord with shouting to the sound of horn, trumpets, and cymbals, and made loud music on harps and lyres. As the ark of the covenant of the Lord came to the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing, and she despised him in her heart. The word of the Lord. He was leaping and he was dancing. For a little more context, for those who may not know, the Ark of the Covenant was a box that was created during the time of Moses, and within it was believed to be the presence of God, the very power of God. Within it is the original or the second rendering of the 10 Commandments after David had broken the first rendering. He recreated it and put them in. Also, there is a jar of the manna that fell from the sky that is believed to be within the box. This box represented the power, the presence, and where God lived. That was thousands of years or hundreds of years before this moment. As we look at the chapters before we get to 15, the Ark of the Covenant had been taken because they had lost a battle, and it had been taken from Jerusalem. And David and his people, they went and they got the Ark of the Covenant back, but something happened. As they were returning it in chapter 13, something happened that the Ark started to tilt and fall, and one of the soldiers who were there went to help and put his hand so that the Ark would not fall. But one of the things that is forbidden is to touch the ark. Anyone who is not clean, anyone who is not a priest, anyone who is not of the Levite family has no right to touch the ark. And this soldier who was there, who was doing something to help, was struck down and died. And the people didn't understand why. David didn't understand why. And so they left the ark within the community of Obed-Edom. They left it in a farm. They left it. And something happened. That place began to prosper. That place began to receive blessing, for the power of God, the presence of God was there. And now as we get to chapter 15, it's time for the Ark of the Covenant to return into Jerusalem. This time they made sure to have all of the Levites that were necessary to hold the ark. They wanted to make sure that nothing would happen, that no one would be hurt, that only the presence of God would be celebrated, and only God would be worshiped. So they had to do it intentionally. They surrounded it, they carried it. If someone got tired, they probably changed them out to make sure that only the people who were allowed to, that only what was necessary, only the things that were done, that needed to be done, were done. And David the king. Let's think about a king for a second. When you think about a king, do you think about someone who is willing to let themselves go before their people, who will allow themselves to be free in front of their people, to be normal in front of their people? Do we think about someone who would be willing to just sit down and grab a beer and watch the football game with just anyone at any pub? Do we think about someone who would sit in the last row up in the nosebleed sections of the link to watch the Eagles play. When we think about a king, do we think about someone who would do things that were normal with everyone else who are normal folk, who we would call normal folk? Normally we wouldn't. Right? We see a king, they're normally raised on a platform, they're presented up front, they have their own special people, their own special guard, very well garbed, very well dressed, a crown on their head if we're thinking about medieval kings. But yet here we see King David, who is in the presence of all of the people in Jerusalem, as the Ark of the Covenant, the very presence of God, the power of God is being brought into Jerusalem. So everyone wants to see this. Everyone wants to be a part of it. Everyone is there. And here you have the king of all of these people, who rightfully so is walking before the ark in celebration of his title. But he does something. He lets go of all the things that were holding him down. He lets go of the linen. He lets go of all and just worships the Lord in a way that was startling for people. It seems that it was startling for his own wife, because it says that she despised him because she was a princess who became a queen and who knew how to act as a royal person. Here was David the king, letting it all go before all of the people, but more importantly, before God. He danced. As they walked through the city, David danced. As they came through the towns, as they came through the communities, as they walked surrounded by people, David did not care that they were looking at him. The only thing he cared about was giving all praise, all honor, and all worship unto God. How does that sound? How many of us who are normal folk would be willing to do that in front of other people? Yet here is the king doing just that. So what is worship? As we see David doing what he's doing, I have to ask, what is worship? As I asked earlier, I wanted you to consider what is worship to you. So when I ask you what is worship, what do you envision? What do you see? What are some of the things that come to mind? Dictionary.com defines worship as showing reverence and adoration for a deity, honor with religious rites. What does worship mean to you? Where does worship happen for you? How does worship happen when you consider worship? One of my pet peeves is often like when I look in a bulletin and I see that they have a section for praise and worship. Because for me, when I think about worship, worship is not a single act or one thing that I do. But instead, worship needs to be all of who I am. When I get up in the morning, when I speak to others, when I preach, when I'm just standing, when I'm at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, my life has to be worship unto God. Do you consider your life to be worship unto God? Christianity is one of the few religions where worship is more personal. And I wouldn't even say Christianity, I would say Protestantism. Catholicism, and this is a history lesson for another day, but we protested against the Catholics and we became Protestants. And one of the benefits and things that came with this new Protestant movement was that God was no longer over there somewhere. God was no longer only within this Ark of the Covenant or in the Holy of Holies, But we believe that when Jesus died and when the veil was torn in the Holy of Holies, now God lived within us. One of the great things that comes with the Protestant Reformation is that God is no longer there and we are here, but now God and the Holy of Holies lives within each of us. It's very personal. When we worship, it is a very personal worship. More often than not, in most religions in the world, they come to their time of prayer and they pray, and that's their worship. And then they go off and do what they do. But for us as Christians, when we pray, we worship. When we sing, we worship. When we talk, we worship. When we breathe, we worship. Like Psalm 150 says, let everything with breath praise the Lord. If you are still breathing, you should be praising the Lord. You should be worshiping. And for many of us, as I was talking a little bit about earlier, how we see worship depends greatly on where we've come from, on our context. For many who come from more charismatic backgrounds, the music and the moving. I grew up in a Spanish church where the music was like salsa and merengue. And so it was always moving. And one of the strange phenomenons that I saw was that when the music was good, God was there and God was moving. But when the music was off, God wasn't always there. And I realized, wait a minute, how is that even possible? Why is it when the music is bumping, everyone is praising? But when the music is not, people seem to not be praising. And I realize a large part of what we call worship is enveloped within us in our emotions because it feels good. And I've heard people say, I have to go get my praise on. They have to go to church and get filled with this awesome music and get riled up, and then they go off for the rest of the week and do their dirty business as they always did. But guess what? Come Sunday, they're going to get recharged again, and then they're going to go off again and do their business. Is that really worship? I'm not criticizing, I'm just sharing. There are those who grew up in more traditional sense where everything is more quiet, everything is more traditional, where the hymns might run a certain speed, everything is kind of more calm. When one goes to the other, they see that as different. Or when a charismatic comes to a traditional, they see that as different. They see that maybe they're not praising how they should or worshiping how they should. So our context and where we come from helps to define what we see as worship. But in this morning, I hope that maybe we can start looking at worship in a different way. Rather than looking at it as music, rather than looking at it as what we want, like what we feel, how we feel. Instead, what if we looked at it as just letting go? The thing that was special about David, it wasn't that he danced a certain dance and he did certain movements. It was that he was able to be free. He just let go of everything. He let go of his crown. He let go of his robe. He let go of everything and focused on the Lord and gave his all. It wasn't just that he danced. It's that he was willing to give it all up, regardless of who was looking, regardless of what the people might say, regardless of the whispers that might occur. He just let it all go and worship God. What is holding you back? And I don't ask this question only as a question for you all. I ask myself this. What is holding me back from worshiping the Lord completely? For we all have something. There's always something. But how do we let go of it? How do we do like David and shed the crown, shed the robe, and just be in the presence of God? How do we let go and let God? Where do we begin? There was a whole process here. They left the Ark of the Covenant somewhere, and then they went back and retrieved it, and this time they had everything in order. Too often, we might leave something somewhere and forget to get things in order to go get it again. We might leave our blessings behind with the thought that we'll go back and get it, but then we just keep walking and never return. We look at our life and say, okay, I have to fix these things. But then we go off and do other things and leave those things as they were. We wonder why we feel the way we feel, and we do the things we do, and we struggle the way we struggle, and we feel restrained. I want to worship the Lord, but I want to be with you, but there's always something holding us back. Where is the thing that you left behind? Where is your ark that is preventing you from moving forward? Where are the things that you needed to organize in order to return and get your ark? The freedom that you want is there. The freedom that you are seeking is there. The presence of God is always with you. The Holy of Holies no longer resides in a place in Jerusalem or in the box of the covenant. It resides within you. So when will you get organized and go and get your blessing? When? This week can be the week. Today can be the start. Right now can be the beginning of you getting your blessing. If you're willing to let it all go. If you're willing to be free from the chains that bind you. If you're willing to stop being held back. The freedom of the Lord is here. If only we were to reach out and grab it. Let us be free as David was. Remove the crowns that we've placed on our own heads. Remove the robes that have tied us up. Release the things that are preventing us. Maybe we can loosen up, get warmed up, and dance like David danced. Or maybe we can sit and listen to the music. Or maybe we can walk and see beautiful creation, all that God has done. Maybe we can listen to the conversations and the words of others around us. Maybe, just maybe, we can find our worship and worship the Lord in the way that we each have been called to worship the Lord. Let us let go of all that is restraining us. Let us release it, let it go, just leave it behind. And let the Lord be the Lord. Let the Lord receive our worship. Let the Lord move in our lives so that maybe we will dance or we will sing. Let us worship the Lord with all of our being, with all of who and what we are. May today be the start of worshiping the Lord completely with all of ourselves. Like David danced, may we also worship free. May we also worship liberated. May we also worship the Lord without restraint or being held at all. May we all worship the Lord beginning today and going on until the day that we return and go with the Lord. May today be the first day of the rest of our worshipful lives. Amen.